The Kochtopus is screwing us all. It begins with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, a frequent guest at the billionaire Koch brothers' annual political strategy sessions and one of the larger tentacles of the Kochtopus. Turns out Christie was lying to keep more of his constituents in New Jersey out of work. Back in 2010, Governor Christie axed plans to build a new train tunnel across the Hudson River that would have put thousands of Americans to work, building one of the largest infrastructure projects in the nation. Governor Christie said New Jersey couldn't afford the project and cited the potential for cost overruns as a reason for killing it. But a new report out by the Independent Government Accountability Office shows that Christie was lying. He was lying to the citizens of New Jersey and the citizens of America. While Christie claimed that the tunnel would cost $14 billion to build and that his state would have to pay 70% of that cost, the new GAO report shows that the tunnel was only going to cost $14 billion, and most importantly, New Jersey was only going to have to pay 14% of the cost, not 70%. Of course, the real reason why Governor Christie claimed his state couldn't spend money to put more Americans back to work, even that little 14%, is because he'd already promised billions of dollars in state tax cuts and tax breaks for big corporations and rich people. But again, that's just one tentacle of the Kochtopus. To get to the heart of the Kochtopus, we have to take a look at the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, a think tank partially supported by the Koch brothers' fortune. Here for the latest news coming out of ALEC and what the Kochtopus is up to, I'm joined by Zed Jelani, investigative reporter with the Republic Report and communications and outreach coordinator with the United Republic. Zed, welcome back.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. Can you give us an overview of the Kochtopus?
Yeah, so the Koch brothers are basically these billionaire industrialists. They made most of their money from oil, gas, and chemical sort of industries, and they fan their money all over, literally hundreds of organizations. Everything ranging from organizations like Americans for Prosperity to also funding ALEC to even funding universities and academic departments.
That's extraordinary. And in fact, the thing I find very ironic is that their father made his money cutting deals with Joe Stalin for the old Soviet Union back in the 40s and 50s, and then funded the John Birch Society, didn't he?
It's exactly true. I mean, this was it was the mid 20th centuries when there was a gigantic push by a lot of industrialists and sort of billionaires, and they saw what happened with the New Deal, and they're saying we got to stop this, otherwise they'll keep going until we have a prosperous, somewhat egalitarian type society.
We can't have that.
No.
Yeah. So you were saying?
Yeah, so basically, we've had this massive movement, and the way that they impact state legislatures is through ALEC. ALEC ships legislation written mostly by its corporate members. I mean, it's more than 98% funded by corporations, very little grassroots funding, and they ship that legislation to different state legislatures, and those legislatures pass that corporate-friendly legislation, and they never let you know that it was ALEC legislation. So it's all done very secretive, very sort of under the table.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. You guys have done some really great reporting on this too. The link between AT&T, the Kochtopus, and climate change denial. This is a particularly fascinating one.
Yeah, so as you know, Koch funds ALEC to basically pass corporate-friendly state legislation. Well, a bunch of other companies also fund ALEC, and AT&T is one of them. Now, AT&T publicly is very much along the lines of saying, we need to deal with climate change, we believe it's man-made, we need to control carbon emissions, so on and so forth. But yet, secretly, they're funding this organization, which all over the country is passing resolutions and state legislatures saying that there is no such thing as man-made global warming, fighting any sort of efforts to limit carbon emissions, requiring schools, this is really interesting, requiring schools to teach both sides of the global warming debate. So that means
both sides.
Both sides, right? So they'll teach the science, which is legitimate, and then they'll teach non-science in a science classroom, basically propaganda saying this doesn't exist. And so, we're catching AT&T in the act here, and a bunch of groups have gotten together and starting to call on AT&T to stand up to its words. If it really does believe in global warming, it shouldn't be funding this organization that's trying to brainwash kids into saying that there isn't any global warming.
It's very much the same tactic that the tobacco companies were using 20 years ago in suggesting that there were two sides to the debate over whether tobacco caused cancer.
No, it's really very, very similar. And there's a similar debate going on over evolution. I mean, basically the idea is that corporations know that when it comes to science, Americans love scientists and our kids love to learn in science classrooms, so they can't just outright deny it. But what they can say is, oh, there's a huge debate. You need to include all these views that aren't driven by science, but maybe, sponsored by ExxonMobil or AT&T in this case.
Remarkable. Color of change, the PCCC, have threatened corporate donors with boycotts, corporate donors to ALEC with boycotts. Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, Kraft, now the Gates Foundation. I didn't even realize Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to this tentacle of the Kochtopus. They've all backed out. Is this a new model for fighting the Koch brothers?
You know, I think it is, because basically ALEC is like a union for corporations. Not every company in ALEC necessarily agrees with everything they do. Like, I doubt AT&T has a position on, you know, the stand your ground, shoot first laws. But what we're doing is we're shaming them. We're telling them that you are in this union and you do have to defend what your money is used to do. So if you don't agree with it, pull out. And I think, you know, 5 or 6 major corporations, everything from Pepsi and Coca-Cola to the Gates Foundation, have pulled out of ALEC. And I think if they want to continue to stand up for values that they espouse in public, they shouldn't continue to fund this organization in private that does all these terrible things.
Yeah, a better analogy might be a gang than a union, but I get it, I get it. Zed, thanks a lot for being with us tonight. Great to see you. The influence of the Kochtopus can no longer be ignored in American politics today. But how did the Kochs get so pervasive? Well, they have someone to thank for it. Here's the bigger picture. The Kochtopus hit maximum power over the past few years, but it was Ronald Reagan who really gave them their launching pad. Back in 1964, Barry Goldwater had revived this odd idea that goes back to the age of the robber barons. Here's Goldwater.
I ask you to join me in helping restore the individual freedoms and initiatives this nation once knew, to make government more the servant and not the master of us all. In this
Yes, this old idea that the corporation should be able to do anything. But anyhow, it turned out Goldwater didn't pull that off so successfully. He lost pretty badly in '64. The front man was a better speaker than Goldwater. Here's what Goldwater frontman Ronald Reagan had to say in 1964 in support of Barry Goldwater.
This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Yes, so in 1971, Lewis Powell wrote a memo to his neighbor and the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce saying that business is under attack and needs to fight back. This followed the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed. These weren't really attacks on business. I mean, Powell was characterizing it that way, but what it was an attack on the willingness of businesses to put profits above human lives. Whether it was pesticides, poisonous pesticides, or exploding cars, all of this stuff was being revealed to the media, to the public via the media, by people like Carson and Nader. And Lewis Powell and Ronald Reagan were freaked out about it. So Powell said the business had to organize and push back. They had to change the wording from that elected government thing that protected us from corporate predators into the big government language of Ronald Reagan that stole our freedom. Koch brothers' freedom, for example, to pollute, or GM's freedom to build exploding cars, to exploit workers. So a group of very rich people took up the challenge. And in 1974, they started the Charles Koch Foundation, known today as the Cato Institute. Kochs and others founded the Heritage Foundation and helped birth many other smaller think tanks and media watchdog groups, which, as Lee Atwater said, worked the refs, the referees being the media. So whenever the media said anything nice about liberals, they would get attacked. Or if they seemed critical of conservatives, they would get attacked. Throughout the 1970s, the Kochtopus was under the radar. But they needed a frontman who'd say that government was an elite, ignoring that it's we the people, and saying over and over again that giant corporations and billionaires running our lives was somehow freedom, was a good thing. Now, they'd say it in code. They would talk about individual freedom. The individuals they're talking about are the billionaires, and they found that in Goldwater's frontman, Ronald Reagan. With Reagan's election, the Kochtopus's words found their biggest frontman, the President of the United States. In Reagan's inaugural address, he echoed the main meme, the theme message of the billionaires, that they, the billionaires, could run a nation better than an elected government. Reagan called it self-rule, that the billionaires would run the show, and suggested that they were we the people. And therefore, those few people, the billionaires, could solve our problems better than an elected government.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people.
Now the Kochtopus owns legislators in every state, funds bloggers and think tanks and media stars, all pretty much saying the same thing, that the government that our founders fought and died to create, 10 generations of Americans fought and died to defend, that government is, as Reagan said, the problem. It's somehow a very bad thing. And we should, as you heard Barry Goldwater say back in '64, have government serve rich people like Goldwater and his funders, or Reagan and his funders, instead of passing laws to make cars safe and protect us from pesticides. And so now Romney, the modern-day Ronald Reagan, himself worth $250 million, a lot richer than Reagan actually, is echoing Reagan's idea that government will bring down billionaires and big corporations if we, the people, and elected government, have our way.
4 years ago, many Americans trusted candidate Barack Obama when he promised to bring Americans together. But now we've learned that President Obama's idea of bringing us together is not to lift us up, but instead to use the invisible boot of government to bring us all down.
You know, the question before all of us, ultimately, is will the Kochtopus win? And really, it's not even the Kochtopus. It's the ghost of Reagan. Will the ghost of Reagan win? And democracy be replaced by a government owned and run by the plutocrats? Or will we, the people, win and democracy be restored? It's up to you and me. The only thing that can overcome corporate power like we're seeing today is grassroots activism. Tag, you're it.